Are you ready to step into the shadows and explore the unexplained? Join us as we delve into chilling tales that will make you question reality. From ghostly apparitions to mysterious occurrences, these stories are not for the faint of heart. Hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to join our journey through the paranormal. Dare to listen, dare to believe. This is not just a story. This is an experience. Are you brave enough to press play? Let the haunting begin. Story 1. I lived in a haunted house for over 15 years. After a while, you just get used to it. We had a lot of the standard haunted house type of activity, like feeling you're being watched, sudden appearance of large, black flies and spiders, sudden awful odors, knocking on the walls, and I also had someone who would kick the foot of my bed if he thought I was sleeping too late in the day. There were also all sorts of other things. Before you say it, I can promise you there was no explanation for these things. In fact, when I told the spirit to stop kicking my bed because I had chronic pain and insomnia, he did, in fact, stop doing it. I saw apparitions, heard voices, and heard knocking on the outside wall of our bedroom, which was on the second floor, so someone would have needed a ladder. It was a wild time, but like I said, you can get used to it. I don't care if anybody else believes me. I have no interest in proving this to anyone. If you've had these kinds of things happen in your life, you know it's real. Story 2. This is more of an unexplained event than paranormal, but one night I was drinking at home and felt kind of sick despite not drinking much, so I decided to lay down, which ended up with my accidentally passing out. I woke up after I heard the wind picking up outside due to a thunderstorm rolling in, but I had one of those surreal feelings after you wake up, like the whole outside world is kind of foreign to you. It's hard to explain unless you've experienced it. I was still feeling like shit, so I turned off the light and went to bed again, but had one of those in-between dreams where something jolts you out of it. I forget the dream, but I jolted out of sleep, and to the left of my bed, I swore I saw a black figure partially bent over looking at me, and instinctively I kicked with both legs out to it, but felt no resistance or anything. When I looked back, there was nothing there. I immediately turned on the light and sat there in fear for a bit, and then turned on the TV so I wasn't sleeping in complete darkness and silence. But the thunderstorm turned severe, so that local channel I had on was blaring the ES alert tone, which made things 10x creepier. Yeah, I didn't get much sleep that night. Story 3. I used to be deathly afraid of sleeping on my own. When I was around 8 or so, I would wait until I knew everyone in the house was asleep, and then go sit in the hallway outside of my room with my back to the wall, for protection from surprise attack, I guess. One night, I heard a strange noise come from my bedroom as I sat in the hallway. I spooked and ran out of the hall, through our living room to my parents' bedroom. I woke my mom up and begged her to let me sleep in their bed, but she eventually compromised and said I could sleep in our living room. This was the 90s, so we had a large tube television facing the couch. While I was laying on the couch, I remember looking at the reflection on the TV screen. In it, I could see the couch I was on and the hall behind me. Suddenly, an adult-sized dark figure walked straight out of the hall and up to the back of the couch I was lying on. I completely froze and tried to hold my breath. I remember saying in my mind, "Just get up and run as fast as you can to Mom." As soon as I was about to jump up, the figure in the reflection dropped down behind the couch. I got up on my knees and peered over the back of the couch, and there was no one there. I ran to my parents' room and fell asleep on the floor beside their bed because I didn't want her to wake up and send me back out with whatever was out there. Story 4. I was in an age that I was fascinated by religions and studied as many as possible. Currently, I am studying Spiritism. I just had read the Book of the Spirits and was anxious about reading the sequel, The Book of the Mediums. I was at my girlfriend's house at the time, a day before my birthday. We were watching horror movies as usual. I've always been a fan of the genre. When the clock struck 23, we went to sleep in different rooms. I went to her aunt's room, and she went to her grandma's. Hers was reforming. I went to sleep as usual. I never had trouble sleeping, so I just closed my eyes and entered alpha state. As soon as I was relaxed, a board containing several photographs fell on me, waking me up instantly. I wasn't scared at all, just startled. When I was thinking about turning the lights on, my girlfriend came into the room, turning the lights on. I was covered in photographs. We laughed a little, and after we cleaned things up, since it was my birthday, already after midnight, she gave me my gift, a brand new copy of the Book of the Mediums. I was overjoyed. It even had a picture of her as a marker. Anxious, I read the first pages, which contain the exact phrase. There are those who think that messing with spirits is a joke or a pastime. They are mistaken, for meddling with spirits involves dangers and even death. And that stuck with me. I didn't say anything to her because I didn't want to scare her, so as I went to sleep again, she asked me, "Do you want me to remove the other photo board?" I tried to knock it down and remove it from the wall, but I couldn't. It was stuck between the big drawer and the wall, and I said, "Nah, this one won't fall." The risk I took was calculated, but man am I bad at math. When I was just about falling asleep again, the second photo board dropped on me, and I was scared. Not scaredy scared, I was terrified. I knew this wasn't a coincidence. It was work of something else, and it was messing with me. I started to cry. I tried to turn on the lights, but I couldn't find the light switch no matter where I looked. I tried to turn on the headlamp, but the switch did nothing. All I could do is grab my phone, call her urgently, and ask her to come to the room again. She found me curled in the corner of the room, crying, pointing to the bed where the photos fell. I said I wasn't going to sleep in that room again. Not today, not ever. She agreed and took me to the living room and put me to sleep on the couch, as if I could sleep again tonight. I stayed awake for hours, trying to fall asleep, and nothing could make me do it. When I closed my eyes, I saw horrifying things. Me stabbing my girlfriend, cutting my sister's throat, getting beaten to death, and I forgot how to pray. I'm telling you, this day I knew the definition of fear and what it does to someone. As I was staring at the wall, I heard someone talking by my side. I couldn't understand, but I turned my head on instinct. Wall, emptiness, no one there. I dashed through the house, leaving everything behind, and bursted into her grandma's room. I sat quietly on the side of the bed, staring at the door, waiting for something to come out. Nothing. My girlfriend woke up and found me on her side of the bed, curled up once again on the floor, staring, eyes wide open. "Is it a ghost?" she said. I felt mockery on her voice, but I couldn't care less. She pointed to a bench in the room, saying, "If you manage to fall asleep, you can sleep there." At this point, I was numb. All I could do was stare at the door. I went to the bench, laid down on my side, and the next thing I know, it's morning. I don't know how, but I fell asleep instantly in that room. As I woke up fully, I saw several crucifixes on her grandma's wall. I never knew she was that religious, but all I could think was that I was protected by the room. I never slept there again, and I never tried to learn spiritism by myself again. Respect the spirits, folk. Story 5. Broke into an abandoned glue factory in Wisconsin with 2 friends of mine. It was a cold and windy January night, with a fresh layer of snow on the ground. There were multiple buildings on this shut-down compound. We got into the first building and snapped some pictures. Nothing seemed off. As we walked to the second building, we commented on how someone was here a day or two ago because the snow had blown over their footprints. We got into the second building and something just felt off. All three of us felt it, just a wiry and uneasy feeling. We decided to leave the building and started to walk out. We noticed a small, child-sized, footprint with the snow piled up on the side of the footprint showing they were fresh prints. They led from a third building and stopped at our footprints that had been snow-blown already. At that moment, we looked towards the first building and saw a flash of light and a shining little girl running away from us. All three of us saw her. We ran, like we were little girls, as fast as we could towards our car. I'm still not sure if I believe in ghosts, but I know what I saw that night. Story 6. The day Mom died, we all piled into the car, family and brother in tow, the silence heavy as we drove to her and stepdad's place. They'd built their dream home right where our old family cabin used to stand. Stepping into the grand room, my eyes caught the massive chandelier, a cascade of sparkling, bubbled glass icicles. It was the one thing Mom truly loved about the whole house. Throughout the day, that chandelier kept acting strange. It'd flicker on and off, all by itself, even though nobody was near the switches. Stepdad swore it had never done that before. That night, my brother and I huddled beneath the chandelier, tears blurring our vision as we clung to each other. And then, just like that, it started again, the flickering. I choked back a sob and whispered to the empty air, "I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry." At that moment, a strange sensation washed over me. A cold touch, yet somehow comforting, like a hand gently squeezing my arm. From then on, the flickering only happened when we were all together in that room. As soon as we left, it stopped, and it never happened again. Story 7. The summer of 2008 was a monsoon of emotions. My friend, someone who considered Radiohead the soundtrack to a rainy day, was tragically taken in a river rafting accident. We'd planned to attend their Vancouver concert together, an outdoor extravaganza promised sunshine. A cruel twist, fate it seemed, had other plans. Before her passing, curiosity piqued. I'd asked what drew her to Radiohead. Music for a rainy day, she'd replied, a melancholic smile gracing her lips. I pressed further, inquiring about her favorite song. A chuckle escaped her. Just, she admitted, but they haven't played it live since the 90s, so don't get your hopes up. Grief-stricken, a group of us found ourselves at the concert a week later. The energy was somber, a collective void where her infectious laughter should have been. Midway through the set, Tom York, the band's enigmatic frontman, surprised everyone. "Been a while," he muttered, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "But here's just." The first chords echoed as the heavens opened. A torrential downpour, the likes of which Vancouver had never witnessed, erupted. Streets flooded, the stage a glistening reflection of the city's tears. The rain, heavy and relentless, mirrored the storm raging within us. That night, under the relentless downpour, Radiohead played Just. In that moment, it felt like she was there with us, a bittersweet melody washing away the pain. Even an article mentioned the song's unexpected inclusion, highlighting the band's struggle against the relentless rain. Some may call it coincidence, but I choose to believe she orchestrated the downpour, a final act of defiance against a world that felt so unfair. She came with us to that concert, no doubt about it. Story 8. I have so many stories, but the one I want to share is one that is very regular. And it does make me upset and happy at the same time. My dog died on January 26th, 2023, but she is still around. It's little things. She was never allowed on the sofas, but would, and she would always be told off and told to get off then. When she jumped down, it was a very distinct noise. I hear that at least once a week when I walk into the living room. And it's a completely random time or day of the week. I still hear her sometimes scratching the back door to go into the garden. So, when I hear that, I unlock the back door to still let my ghost dog out. And on some rare occasions, she scratches to come back in, so I let her in, and normally cry a bit. I heard her drinking from her water bowl when it was a really hot day, but the water bowl was given away. Where her bed was in the corner of the room next to some big furniture. When she got old, she used to bump into them a lot, and again once a week I would hear one of them get bumped into. When I was gaming, I noticed my leg got very cold, my right thigh to my knee. So I looked and I saw this orb, yellow and white, about knee height, float/fly slowly from my right side to directly in front of me. The orb went towards the TV, still knee high, and directly in between me and the TV. And then it just slowly faded away. It was the same height as my dog. I was so blown away by what I saw and felt I just sat in shock for a bit before I went to make myself a cup of tea to get over it. Surprisingly, I kept 2 of her favorite dog toys, but they never have any paranormal activity around. The last thing was me seeing her. So when I walk back from work, she would always be at the window waiting for me and would get visibly happy. And then once I'm at the door, run down and around to greet me. Well, I had a rough day and was far away in my mind thinking. When I saw her, it was not clear, but enough for me to forget that she had passed. And once again, I was happy. I wish I took it in more because once I opened the door, I was waiting for her to greet me, and then, just as it is now writing it, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I know people don't believe in the paranormal world. I know the noise can be easily explained, but when you hear your dog for 15 years making those noises, it's unmistakable when they aren't around, and it then happens. It definitely makes you believe. And again, with seeing ghosts of people and animals, I don't think you should dismiss it until you see it yourself or have evidence, or someone who is deeply affected by what they saw or heard. I think that's when you need to reconsider the world we live in. Story 9. Saw my mom 3 times after she passed. It wasn't scary, not at all. The first time, I was in bed, her old bed actually. I'd been feeling awful after the funeral, a turn for the worse, and there she was, beside me. Young, like in her 20s, 30s maybe, just standing there looking worried. The second time was even stranger. We'd just brought her ashes home from the crematorium, my son and I, sleeping in my room. We woke up in the night, both of us, to see the back of her, pointing right up at her ashes, resting on top of the wardrobe. Then, she just walked through the door. Now, get this. My son, he saw someone else. The back of his older brother, very much alive, doing the same pointing thing. Up at the wardrobe. Interesting, right? Makes you wonder if maybe our place is haunted, the previous resident acknowledging Mom's ashes. The third time, well, that was different. I was getting ready for college, putting on makeup in the bathroom mirror. In the reflection of my bedroom door, I could have sworn I saw her head floating there. Just her head, levitating, smiling at me. Not scary, not one bit. The scary part? That was seeing her at the mortuary, hours after she passed, before the funeral home took her away. Now, that messed me up. Story 10. This is a story from my mom. Once she was sleeping at night and had not a dream or a nightmare, but a phrase that repeats itself, like a warning. The back door is open. The back door is open. Finally, after some time, She woke up alone in the middle of the night towards the back door of our house. Everyone was sleeping, me, my brothers, and my father. The point is, to get to the back door, it was necessary to pass through the kitchen, and she noticed the oven was hotter than the sun and maybe about to explode. My dad was cooking and waiting for a cake to get ready, but he fell asleep meanwhile. She turned it off and the story ended well, but she always joked, if the phrase was "the oven is turned on," I would keep myself sleeping. Story 11. Maya and Luna. Those two furry goofballs were masters of navigating the obstacle course that was my living room floor, especially during epic video game sessions. Crawling under the coffee table, weaving between my legs, it was a well-worn path for them. One afternoon, lost in the throes of a virtual battle, I felt the familiar brush of fur against my leg. No big deal, just another canine maneuver. But a few minutes later, the scene turned bizarre. The back door creaked open, and there stood my brother, both dogs trailing behind, fresh from their walk. My jaw dropped. How in the world? It was a classic case of phantom pup. Paranormal occurrences were practically par for the course in that old house, you see. This was just another notch on the belt of the unexplainable. It left a delicious shiver running down my spine, a reminder of the unseen energy that sometimes seemed to crackle in the air. Story 12. During COVID, I moved back to my parents' house. One day, I walked out of the bathroom, and it was the middle of the day, but no one was home. The front door literally slow motion opened right in front of me. I thought my parents had arrived and opened it, but once the door opened completely, no one was there. My dad tried to explain that the door had issues, etc., and tried to imitate the situation by closing it very slowly or locking it lightly. Nothing he tried could replicate what had happened that day. In the following weeks, the door of our neighbor, who lives right across the hall, was fully open. No one had come. They live abroad and only visit once a year. No one could explain it. After that, not much had happened. In the following months, though, I was up till past 2 to 3 a.m. one night, and oddly enough, again as I walked out of the bathroom, I saw a bright light in the living room, and immediately my heart started pumping. The light disappeared in a few seconds, and I had no idea what that was. The next day I asked my sister, and she said that she saw it too once, that the TV just turns on for a few seconds and turns off again. So I waited the next night, and surely enough, at exact 3 a.m., the TV turned on. It was a picture of my grandpa and some family members at a picnic. My grandpa had died years ago. The photo kept appearing at 3 a.m. every day, until one day it didn't. Still gives me the shivers. Story 13. This old building, my workplace, whispers of a different time. Built in the early 1900s as a Catholic hospital, it now houses seniors in need of assisted living. Working the night shift here is unlike anywhere else. It's a place where the past bleeds into the present, and the veil between the living and the dead seems especially thin. Let's just say, my colleagues and I have experienced our fair share of the peculiar. There are the regular residents, of course, the human ones. But then there are the others. We have a handful of spectral companions who grace, or sometimes haunt, our halls. There's the peeker, a mischievous soul who likes to pop around corners for a quick look before disappearing in a flash. We've all seen him, and the sight of him caught red-handed, or should I say, spectral-handed, never fails to bring a smile. Then there are the nuns. No surprise in a former Catholic hospital, right? These ethereal sisters have been spotted by myself and many colleagues, a fully formed nun gliding down the hallway, another peering from the reflection in the glass. On the 5th floor, whispers of footsteps follow you, and a resident with a particular gift for seeing the unseen once described a veiled lady watching over her shoulder. We consider these nuns to be a watchful presence, a ghostly version of a concerned nurse. Strange occurrences, a resident wandering, a sudden pain, often precede the nuns' visits, prompting us to check in and make sure everyone's all right. Thankfully, most of the time, it's just a minor situation needing attention. The dark man adds a more enigmatic note. Several co-workers and residents have described him, a shadowy figure who leans against the wall, observing your work, vanishing the moment you acknowledge him. His intentions remain a mystery, but at least he hasn't caused any harm. The long man, however, sends shivers down my spine, and thankfully, I've only heard about him through terrified resident accounts. He lurks unseen in the ceiling, a chillingly tall figure who extends himself down into doorways with a toothy grin. One scream from the resident, and he disappears back into the floorboards. Nightmares for sure. As for my personal experiences, well, let's just say the usual shadow out of the corner of my eye doesn't even begin to cover it. Just the other night, I was mopping near the kitchen when a face with shockingly pink skin and wide, staring eyes peered in at me through the glass window. A double take confirmed it wasn't my reflection. When I told my coworker, bless her heart, she decided a good yelling at the ghost was in order. Not surprisingly, an hour later, a full milk jug on the table decided to spontaneously explode. Let's just say it seemed the ghost wasn't too pleased with her outburst. These are just a few snippets from my nightly adventures in this fascinating, haunted haven. There's slamming doors triggered by misplaced curses, ahem, mea culpa, spectral figures appearing near the dying, and mischievous radio antics. One particularly unnerving night, I was walking along the third-floor hallway when a dark shadow darted into a room. We had a resident in hospice care, her time nearing its end. A chill ran down my spine. The spirits always seem restless when someone's passing approaches. She's on the second floor. If that's who you're looking for, I whispered into the empty hallway, a nervous plea to the unseen. A little over an hour later, the inevitable arrived. Our resident had passed away peacefully. Then there was my first night here. Fresh and wide-eyed, I was struggling with a heavy laundry basket near the nurse's office, the very room that once housed the head nun. In a moment of frustration, a curse slipped past my lips. The building seemed to hold its breath for a moment, then all hell broke loose. Every single heavy fire door in the vicinity slammed shut with a bone-jarring thud. Needless to say, apologies were made in a very sincere hurry. The experience left me both shaken and strangely respectful of the unseen residents of this place. On another occasion, a co-worker investigating a reported shadow child in a dying resident's room came racing back, her face pale. The specter, a small, dark figure, had vanished through the solid wall. There have been radios inexplicably switching on, only to blare old jazz music when we arrive. And once, a co-worker responding to a slammed shut door in the dining room found the room eerily still, the radio powered down. Well, it's time for everyone to go to bed anyways. I chuckled, a nervous lightness in my voice. Go get some sleep, everyone. The ghosts, it seemed, weren't fans of bedtime enforcement. The door slammed shut again, and the radio flickered to life, the mournful strains of a saxophone filling the air. All right, I conceded, a touch of amusement battling with the lingering unease. You win. Just promise not to be grouchy in the morning, all right? Living and working in a former Catholic hospital-turned-assisted living facility certainly isn't for the faint of heart. But between the spectral shenanigans and the genuine care we provide for our residents, there's a unique energy here, a strange harmony between the living and the departed. It's unnerving at times, yes, but undeniably fascinating. And who knows, maybe someday I'll even get to see the Long Man myself. Though perhaps that's a wish I should take back before it comes true. Story 14. The ghost cat had always been a whisper in the periphery, a fleeting black shadow that danced at the edge of my vision, vanishing the moment I tried to focus. But one sweltering afternoon, as I stretched out on the couch for a nap, it finally decided to make its presence known. Sunlight speared through the window, dappling the worn fabric beneath me. I lay on my stomach, facing away from the back of the couch. A sudden dip, a sensation like a small body landing, jolted me. It was on the cushions behind me, and a slow, methodical walk began. Each step sent a faint tremor through the couch, a whisper against my back. A sound, a raspy, broken purr, filled the air, sending shivers down my spine. Terror locked me in place. The purr grew louder, a coarse rumble that scraped against my nerves. It was close now, impossibly close, right by my head. I could feel a warm puff of breath on my ear, sending a jolt of primal fear through me. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to see what lurked behind, but I was frozen, a fly caught in a spider's web. With a Herculean effort, I willed myself to move. My eyelids fluttered open, battling the overwhelming urge to stay shut. Finally, a sliver of defiance sparked, and I threw myself over. The sensation of a startled leap registered on my skin, followed by a whoosh as the curtains billowed outwards, as if something had darted behind them. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and I took a shuddering breath, the ghost cat's presence lingering in the heavy air. Story 15. I've had a few bizarre experiences. First, when I was 7 years old, I was completely heartbroken when my grandfather died. He'd been in a wheelchair the entire time I knew him due to polio, with one leg shorter than the other. He was also in intense pain all the time. When he passed, my mom flew back to where my grandparents lived to help with the funeral. I remember the first night she was gone. My dad tucked me in. In my room, when I laid in bed facing the left, I had a clear view to my bedroom door. When my dad tucked me in, I asked him to leave the door open a teensy bit, and a few moments went by, and I heard a knock on my door. I thought maybe Dad had finished tucking in my brother and had heard me crying, so he came back. I heard the knock, didn't reply, but my door opened up anyway. It was my grandpa, standing in the hallway, on his own two equal-length legs. He held the door open with one arm, waved at me with his other hand, and smiled at me. I was petrified. He held a finger to his lips to say, "Keep quiet." Then he whispered, "See? I'm okay. Go to sleep now." Then he closed the door back the way it was, leaving it a little ajar. I was freaked out. I waited a few seconds, hearing footsteps walking lightly away. As soon as those sounds were gone, I leapt out of bed, ran to my dad's room, and insisted I sleep in his bed. Never told him what I saw. Now, as an adult, I think it's super sweet. Okay, story number 2. This one still freaks me out. It's spring of 1998. I'm Shinastego. My older brothers were heading out somewhere, and I had to ride along with them, which I hated. My oldest brother's car always made me feel nauseous and car sick. I sat in the back of the car, trying desperately not to puke, and just generally feeling really out of it mentally. In the front seat, my 2 older brothers are laughing, listening to a tape of stand-up comedy. Finally, a bit by Phil Hartman comes up. I suddenly feel overwhelmingly sad, on top of the intense nausea. I speak up and say, "Tim, Can we skip this one, please? He replies, I thought you loved Phil Hartman. I said, half conscious, I do, but it's just too sad. What do you mean? It's so sad. I said, still trying not to throw up. How he died. No one deserves that. My brother turned around from the front passenger seat with this super confused look on his face. What are you talking about? Phil Hartman's not dead. Yes, he is. He got shot. His wife killed him. It was just on the news. No, he's alive and well, I promise. We had a long argument about it, all the way home. When we got home, the first thing we did was boot up AOL and search. No news about him being dead. He was scheduled to be on some TV show that week. Sure enough, he appeared, alive and well. I was so confused because it was such an intense, overwhelming, instant feeling of sadness and just absolute knowing, no doubt. As sure as the sun is yellow and the sky is blue. He died less than a month later. Got shot by his wife. I was watching TV with my brother Tim when we saw the news. He gave me the most freaked out look I have ever seen in my life, but we've never talked about it since. I had a similar experience with the Concorde crash in 2000. Had a super vivid dream. I was flying on it as a passenger when it crashed into a big building and I died just as I woke up. Then, a week later. Story 16. I've had only one paranormal experience that I had trouble making a rational sense of. This was many years ago, when I was in high school. I lived in an isolated community where ghost stories and paranormal stuff were pretty common. I thought nothing of the stories until one night. I was fast asleep as I had class in the morning. My room was also on the second level of our house, so I rarely woke up due to noise. All of a sudden, I had a horrible nightmare. I can only describe it as seeing the woman at the end of Wreck, a pale, skinny humanoid figure, and then I heard the most awful scream or blood-gurgling pierce in my ears so loudly. I immediately woke up in a sweat and heart beating out of my chest. As soon as I got my bearings, I heard someone coming into the house. Since I was not sleeping again anyway, I went to check it out, and this was at 3 to 4 a.m., so I was curious who it was. It was my mom, her friend and daughter, and they looked terrified. My mom didn't know either, as her friend only called and asked to be picked up ASAP. Neither of them could speak, as at first they were too scared. Eventually, she explained that she was down in their basement, putting wood in their furnace for the night. Then, in the corner of her eye, she saw this pale, horrifying figure, and as soon as her eyes locked on it, this thing screamed at her so loudly it woke her daughter up upstairs. She booted it, grabbed her daughter, and ran out of the house and called my mom. I told her about my nightmare. What I saw and heard in my dream was identical to what she had just experienced. To make it even weirder, my mom had a Christmas present for another friend's baby in her closet. The whole night, it was going off as if someone was pulling the string on it, repeating, "Oh boy." It never did this for the weeks it was in there prior to that night. Needless to say, none of us slept a wink. Story 17. We lived in an extended family, and when I was 15, my grandfather died. A few weeks later, I was home alone and put on the stereo reasonably loud as I had to do something down the other end. I remember the following like it was just yesterday. After I had only been out of the room a few minutes, the CD player started to change songs. Not skipping, but starting different tracks. I stopped picking up clothes. The stereo volume, which was a separate amp unit, had the volume go up and down repeatedly for about 20 seconds. The room temp dropped and I got goosebumps. Still frozen, I yelled out, "Pop, if you don't like it, then I can turn it off." I stayed still frozen. The music stopped. I shit myself. Then declaring loudly, "I am coming down to the lounge now," before I dropped the clothes and nervously went to investigate. In the living room, the stereo doors were shut. The CD was now paused. The amp unit was turned off, as well as the graphics equalizer, old school discrete part stereo. To this day, I swear my grandfather did not like the music and made it very clear to me that day. Throughout my teens, I used to see blurry or fizzed outlines of ghosts or entities, and it scared the shit out of me. After 6 months of visitations, I think by my grandfather, I asked him if a particular entity was real, stuck my hand out towards it, and my hand tingles where we intersected. I asked this entity to politely stop visiting as it was scaring me. Never saw that one again. Seen or felt about 4 or 5 distinct entities since then, but no real visitations since my early 20s, now in late 40s. Story 18. I'm late, but if anyone reads these by new. I used to walk my dog in the evening when I lived in Brooklyn on a quiet block. Just a quick potty break before bed around the street. There was one spot that just didn't feel right. I felt like I was being watched by someone who was about to jump me on the sidewalk. My dog couldn't care less. Sometimes he would stop in that spot and sit down, waiting, not asking for a treat or looking at me, just stopping here. I always felt uneasy. One night my dog sits, and a few seconds later I hear the clink of his leash clasp. I look down and his leash is on the ground. My dog was a Shiba Inu. I look at him. He looks at me. My muscle moves a fraction and he takes off. My dog runs into a dark alley behind some houses. The end of the alley is overgrown with bushes and ivy. Dog is having a blast. I'm in a cold sweat panic. If my dog hadn't stopped to shit, I would never have caught him. I put his leash on and I ran like hell out of there. I decide I don't care how crazy it sounds. I will not walk on that side of the street again. Next night, we walk around the block, but I'm across the street. I stare at that spot as if someone is going to appear, but of course doesn't. I turn my head and keep walking. Suddenly, there's a loud metal slam, like something hitting the parking sign across the street. I jump out of my skin and turn around. Nothing and no one is there. I think whatever was on that side of the street was pissed that I wasn't walking my dog with them anymore. Story 19. My old house was haunted by an old lady ghost. She and her husband built the house in the 1920s to 30s and lived there until they died. They died in 2003 to 2004, I think. Then I rented the house from their son after he did a long-term renovation in 2008. My family was the first to actually live in the house other than him being there on weekends, cleaning and fixing things for a few years. I'd see things almost every day. Shadow figures, sounds of doorknobs rattling, footsteps, etc. We'd often smell cigarettes followed closely by perfume. 2 experiences stand out, though. All of the windows in the house were the old wood frame type that slid up, and the latches rotated under a hook. When I took a shower, I'd open the window a bit because there was no bathroom exhaust fan. One day, the window shut and latched while I was taking a shower. I thought my GF did it, but I opened the curtain immediately and the door was still closed and I was alone in the bathroom. Next was a crazy one. My GF and I are sitting on the couch at night watching TV. To our left is the open doorway where a swinging door was once, now just open to the kitchen. On the opposite wall was the door to the laundry room, and in the laundry room was the door to the garage. We both heard the door handle to the laundry room jiggle. We looked over and watched the door open and swing about 2 foot open, then close, latch, and lock itself. She screamed, and I got up and ran to the door, thinking someone was breaking in. The laundry room door was locked. I went in, and the door to the garage was locked from the inside. I went into the garage, and the doors were all locked and dead-bolted closed. The only man door went into the backyard, and there were floodlights outside. I flipped on and couldn't hear or see anyone. I went back inside, closing and locking doors behind me, and after calming her down, we talked about it and had the same experience. Story 20. Back in high school, cruising down one of those deserted country back roads just after nightfall, my friend and I were deep in conversation. I was behind the wheel, headlights carving a path through the inky blackness, when a single light caught my eye in the rearview mirror. An oddity. It was a kind of pale, greenish white, but I figured it was just a motorcycle, no big deal. That is, until it did the impossible. 1 second it was a speck in the distance. The next it had rocketed upwards with impossible speed, ending up right outside my driver's window. As it hovered there, the strangest thing happened. It turned almost transparent, like frosted glass, yet it still bent the light behind it, warping the world in a disconcerting way. My friend and I, we both jumped out of our skins. Whatever this thing was, it defied explanation. It was roughly the size of a giant exercise ball, pulsing with an eerie light, and it kept pace with us for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was probably only 10 seconds or so, before darting away at an unimaginable speed. Now, I'm a science guy through and through, always scoffing at tales of the unexplained. But that night, out there on those empty back roads, logic took a flying leap out the window. To this day, I have absolutely no idea what my friend and I witnessed. It remains a chilling, unforgettable encounter. Story 21. I haven't experienced it directly, but my sister and I shared a room when we were children. When she was maybe 6 years old, making me 12 at the time, there were a few weeks where she would wake up in the middle of the night absolutely terrified. When asked about it, she said that an older lady she doesn't know stood next to her bed, threatening to kill her if she didn't return her daughter to her. My sister said that this lady's appearance was usually preceded by a dream, where she saw the woman and her daughter chased and killed by a group of men. This was dismissed by our parents, but I saw how she was getting more and more scared as time went on. This wasn't a nightly occurrence, but regular enough for me to become concerned and tell my sister to wake me up the next time it happened. At this point, it should be noted that we had bunk beds, and when my sister woke me up on the next occasion, I was pretty frightened myself, as her fear was quite genuine. Still, I looked over to the side of the bed where my sister said the woman was standing. I can confirm that I did not see a thing, for which I remain thankful, and did my best to explain to this apparent apparition that my sister is very sorry to see what she had experienced, but that there was nothing that we could do except offer our condolences and ask that she please not scare my sister anymore. My sister said that the lady was listening. I felt like an utter fool in the morning, but my sister said that she never saw the lady again, which is all I wanted out of it anyway. Story 22. When I first brought my wife, then girlfriend, home to meet my parents, she stayed in my old room. I slept out on the back porch, always did in the summer when I went home to visit. In the morning, I went up to wake her. She was sitting straight up in bed and told me she didn't sleep all night. I asked why, and she said during the night a man appeared in the room, walked over to the edge of the bed, sat down and smiled at her, and then stood and walked into the closet and disappeared. I laughed and told her my parents' house was haunted, had been for years, and that was just the old owner. He was harmless. She didn't believe me, so I told her to ask my dad, and he told her the exact same thing. Years later, we were looking through some old photos of my family. She looked at the photo of my grandfather, and I knew by the look on her face what was going through her mind. I didn't say anything, and she eventually, after a few moments, asked me who this man was. I told her it was my grandfather, and then laughed and asked her if that was the man she saw in my room. It was. I told her I wasn't surprised. I was close to him, and he was probably just checking her out. The fact he smiled meant he gave her his approval. Story 23. I was sitting in my basement on the computer. There has been a clock hanging on the wall to my right for years. Suddenly I heard a loud crash, froze for a second, then looked around. I noticed the clock was not on the wall, but the nail was still on the wall. The clock had the type of hanger that you have to lift up and off the head of the nail. Sorry, don't know what it's called. To this day, I don't know how the clock got off the nail and landed where it did. I did some tests with it and just held the clock up on the wall and dropped it as if it was hanging precariously somehow for years, and it just landed on the desk right below where it was hanging. Where the clock landed and how loud it was crashing made me believe some force had to somehow lift the clock up off the nail and throw it. I have no good explanation for how it landed, where it did, how it came off the nail, and how the nail was still in the wall. I'm sure there is one, and I'll never say ghosts did it, but it was certainly outside the norm. I wish I saw it happen. It was just outside my peripheral vision. I also had an RC car controller thrown at me while I was sleeping. Story 24. About 15 years ago, a friend brought his 2 teenage sons around. They played a game with my son upstairs in his room while we had a drink and talked. All normal. They left. My son, as unimaginative and geeky as boys get, went upstairs for a piss. A minute later, I heard a door slam and he rushed downstairs and sat on the bottom step. He was white and shaking. When he could talk, he said that as he was using the toilet, a woman, dark hair, in a white blouse and a full skirt had walked past him, turned to look in his direction, and then disappeared through the wall. When questioned, he said she must have been very short, and then he realized he couldn't recall seeing her legs or feet. This is a very, very old house. The upstairs floors have been raised, and the wall she walked through is modern. What he described fits the old layout. I've lived here 25 years and seen nothing. He's never seen anything like that since. If we understood time, we might understand how it is possible to see into the past. I wonder what she saw. Story 25. I lived on the other side of the country from my mother, about 4,000 kilometers, Australia. The night she died, about 2 a.m., a unique pottery bowl she had given me fell to the floor and smashed. It had been sitting on a wall unit beside a vase with 1 or 2 similar items. There was no reason on earth for that particular item to fall on that particular night. My mother and I had been close. I had visited her a week or 2 before her death. She was old, ill, and dying. Her death, although sad, was no surprise. We had jokingly talked about her sending me a sign that there is an afterlife. It is quite comforting to think that, perhaps, my mom did what she could for her child. A last gift.